You've probably been told this your whole life. Be polite. Be nice. Don't rock the boat. And you listened. You say please. You say thank you. You don't interrupt. You don't push back. You try to be easy to deal with. But let me ask you something uncomfortable. If politeness actually worked the way we were promised, why are the politest people usually the least respected in the room? Think about it. At work, who gets listened to? Not the one who's the nicest. It's the one who speaks with certainty. In friendships, who sets the tone? Not the most accommodating. It's the one who draws lines. In arguments, who wins? Not the most polite, the one who refuses to shrink. Here's the dark truth nobody says out loud. Politeness doesn't build reputation. Perception does. And perception is shaped less by what you say, and more by what you allow. Every time you over-explain, you teach people to question you. Every time you apologize unnecessarily, you lower your own value. Every time you laugh off disrespect, you normalize it. You think you're being mature. They think you're safe to ignore. This is where it gets dangerous, because most of these habits are socially rewarded. People praise you for being easy, chill, understanding. But behind your back, they stop taking you seriously. And some people don't just notice this, they use it. They interrupt you because they know you won't stop them. They push deadlines because they know you won't resist. They cross boundaries because they've never faced consequences. That's not bad luck. That's conditioning. Now let's talk about the habits you need to stop. Immediately. Let's start with the first habit. And this one is so common, it almost feels harmless. But it's usually the very first place respect starts leaking out, without you noticing. Because before people dismiss your ideas, before they question your authority, before they feel comfortable pushing back, there's one subtle mistake that opens the door. The first habit is over-explaining yourself, and once you see how it works, you'll realize how often it's been used against you. Pay attention to what happens the next time someone questions you. You don't just answer. You justify. You clarify. You add context. You add background. You add reasons on top of reasons. Not because they asked, but because you felt the pressure to be understood. And psychologically, that's where the damage begins. Over-explaining doesn't make you look thoughtful. It makes you look unsure. It signals that your decision needs approval, that your stance can be negotiated, that you're afraid of being challenged. Think about how authority actually sounds. When someone with status speaks, they don't rush to defend themselves. They state, they pause, they let slants do the work. And silence, whether people admit it or not, feels like confidence. Now flip the situation. You explain your decision 3 different ways. You anticipate objections before they're even raised. You answer imaginary doubts out loud. What people hear isn't clarity. It's anxiety. And here's the dark part. People don't consciously think this person is weak. They feel it. The human brain is wired to associate excess explanation with lower status. It's the same reason suspects overtalk and leaders don't. Have you noticed how the more you explain, the more questions you get? That's not curiosity. That's probing. You've signaled that your words aren't final, so people test them. They interrupt. They challenge. They ask for more justification. And suddenly, you're trapped in a loop where you're constantly defending things that didn't need defending in the first place. This habit usually comes from good intentions. You want to be fair. You want to be understood. You want to avoid conflict. But respect doesn't grow in comfort. it grows in certainty. The moment you stop over-explaining, something strange happens. People lean in. They listen harder. They take your words more seriously. Not because you became smarter, but because you stopped auditioning for approval. And once people sense that your decisions don't need their permission, they treat you differently. Now here's the problem. Most people don't stop at over-explaining. They stack it with another habit that quietly erases authority even faster. And it starts with a single word you probably say every day without thinking. Now that you've seen how over-explaining weakens your position, there's another habit that usually follows right after it, almost automatically. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. Most people don't even realize they're doing it. But it sends an even clearer signal than over-explaining ever could. The second habit is apologizing when you're not wrong. And once you notice how often it slips out, you'll understand why people feel comfortable putting you on the defensive. Pay attention to how often sorry leaves your mouth, not because you made a mistake, not because you hurt someone, but because you're trying to smooth the moment. Sorry for the delay. Sorry to bother you. Sorry, just one quick question. Each time you say it, you're not apologizing. You're positioning yourself. And psychologically, an apology does one powerful thing. It assigns fault. Even when no one asked for one. That's the part most people miss. When you apologize without being wrong, you're preloading guilt. You're telling the other person, I'm already at fault, so you don't have to look for one. And people respond accordingly. They interrupt you more. They push deadlines. They feel entitled to correct you. Not because they're cruel, but because humans subconsciously follow status cues. And repeated, unnecessary apologies signal lower ground. Think about authority figures you respect. Do they apologize for existing in the conversation? Or do they reserve apologies for moments that actually matter? There's a reason for that. Apologies are powerful currency. When you spend them constantly, they lose all value. Worse, they teach people that your presence is an inconvenience. Your needs are secondary. And your time is flexible. This habit usually forms early. You learn that apologizing keeps things calm. It avoids tension. It makes you likable. But likability and respect are not the same thing. And confusing them is expensive. Here's the darker layer. Some people notice this habit immediately. They don't call it out. They lean into it. They let you apologize for their lateness. They let you take responsibility for unclear instructions. They let you feel awkward for simply asking for what you're owed. And the more you apologize, the more natural it feels for them to let you carry the weight. The shift isn't about becoming rude or defensive. It's about precision. Apologize when you're wrong. Be neutral when you're not. Because when your words stop assigning blame to yourself, people are forced to place responsibility where it actually belongs. And once you stop apologizing for things you didn't do, something else becomes uncomfortable. The moments where people cross lines and expect you to laugh it off. Once you stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault, a new kind of tension appears. Not in others, in you. Because now you're aware of the moments where something feels off. But addressing it would make things uncomfortable. And that's where the next habit quietly steps in. The third habit is laughing things off that should be addressed. Someone makes a comment that crosses a line. A joke lands just a little too sharp. A boundary gets tested. And instead of stopping it, you smile, you laugh, you brush it away. In the moment, it feels smooth. Socially intelligent, mature. But psychologically, you've just done something powerful. You've rewarded the behavior. Humans are conditioned by response, not intention. What gets a laugh gets repeated. What gets ignored becomes acceptable. And what's tolerated once becomes the new baseline. Here's the part people don't like to admit. Disrespect rarely starts loud. It starts small. A tone, a joke, a casual dismissal. And every time you laugh it off, you tell the other person, "This is safe to do to me." Not verbally, behaviorally. Over time, the jokes stop being jokes. The comments get bolder. The line keeps moving, and you're the only one who notices because you're the one paying the cost. And once people sense you won't push back, they relax around you. Not in a good way. They interrupt more freely. They speak over you. They test boundaries without hesitation. Because you've proven that friction makes you uncomfortable, and discomfort is leverage. This habit usually hides behind emotional intelligence. You tell yourself you're choosing peace. You're being the bigger person. But there's a difference between emotional control and emotional avoidance. Control sets boundaries calmly. Avoidance erases them completely. And here's the darker layer. Some people rely on your laughter. They use humor as a shield. If you laugh, they're innocent. If you don't, you're too sensitive. So they keep pushing, not to hurt you, but to see how far they can go. The moment you stop laughing things off, the room changes. There's a pause. There's tension. And suddenly, respect enters the conversation. Not because you raised your voice, but because you removed the reward. And once you stop rewarding subtle disrespect, something else becomes obvious. The way silence, even respectful silence, can erase you entirely. Once you stop laughing things off, you start noticing something else. Not what people say, but who the room revolves around. Because respect isn't just about how you're treated one-on-one. It's about where you sit in the group dynamic. And there's a habit that quietly pushes you to the edges without anyone ever telling you to move. The fourth habit is always letting others finish first. You wait. You pause. You let everyone else speak. You tell yourself it's respect, good manners, emotional intelligence. But in group settings, silence isn't interpreted as thoughtfulness. It's interpreted as absence. Conversations don't just exchange ideas. They establish hierarchy. And the people who shape the flow of a conversation shape how they're perceived. When you consistently hold back, people don't think you're considerate. They assume you have less to contribute. Think about meetings, group discussions, even casual conversations. The person who speaks early sets the frame. The person who speaks last reacts to it. And reaction, psychologically, always sits lower than initiation. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The world doesn't reward restraint. It rewards presence. If your voice only shows up after everyone else has finished, your input feels optional. Over time, something subtle happens. People stop waiting for you. They stop asking for your opinion. They fill the silence for you. Not out of malice, but out of habit. And once you're no longer expected to speak, you're no longer expected to matter. This habit usually forms from fear of interruption, fear of seeming rude, fear of being wrong. But authority doesn't wait for perfect timing. It creates timing. Notice how people with status interrupt lightly, not aggressively, but confidently. They don't ask permission to enter the conversation. They assume they belong in it. And assumption is contagious. The shift isn't about talking over people. It's about not erasing yourself in the name of politeness. Because when you consistently let others finish first, you train the room to move on without you. And once that happens, something else follows naturally. You become low maintenance, easy, adaptable, and quietly forgettable. Once people get used to you speaking last, something else locks into place. They stop checking in. They stop adjusting. They assume you'll adapt because there's a habit that often grows out of silence, one that sounds positive, even flattering, but slowly makes you invisible. The fifth habit is being low maintenance. People describe you with a smile. You're easy to work with. You don't ask for much. You're chill. It feels like a compliment. And at first, it is. But over time, it becomes a label. And labels shape behavior. When you're low maintenance, people don't think about your needs. They don't plan around you. They don't factor you in. Not because they don't like you, but because you've taught them they don't have to. Here's the darker psychology at play. Humans value what requires effort. What costs nothing is taken for granted. And when your presence never creates friction, it never creates importance either. So you adjust your schedule. You accept last-minute changes. You take on extra work without resistance. And quietly, your flexibility becomes an expectation. The more you accommodate, the less people feel the need to accommodate you. That's the trade no one warns you about. This habit often comes from pride. You don't want to be difficult. You don't want to seem needy. You don't want to risk being seen as a problem. But problems get addressed. Comfort gets ignored. And some people notice this pattern fast. They give you less notice. They offer you less credit. They assume you'll be fine with less. Because you always have been. The shift isn't about demanding more. It's about allowing inconvenience to exist. The moment people feel even slight resistance, they register your presence differently. Respect grows where adjustment is required. And once you stop being low maintenance, something interesting happens. People start noticing who's doing the work and who's taking the credit for it. Once you stop being low maintenance, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You start seeing where the effort goes and where the recognition lands. Because there's a habit that looks generous on the surface, even noble, but quietly removes you from the picture before anyone has time to notice you were ever there. The sixth habit is giving credit before you're seen. You highlight others. You downplay your role. You say, "It was a team effort," and leave it there. It sounds mature, selfless, professional. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Recognition doesn't go to effort. It goes to visibility. When you erase yourself from the story too early, people don't see humility. They see absence, and absence doesn't get remembered. Think about how stories work. The person who tells the story controls the narrative. When you rush to give credit before your contribution is clear, you remove yourself from the frame entirely. And once you're out of the frame, you can't be valued. This habit usually comes from fear. Fear of seeming arrogant. Fear of standing out. Fear of being judged for claiming space. But claiming space isn't arrogance. It's survival. The darker psychology is this. People fill in gaps with convenience. If your role isn't obvious, they assume it was small. If your effort isn't visible, they assume it was easy. And some people don't just let that happen. They step into the vacuum. They speak confidently about the work. They accept praise without correction. They let the room believe the version that benefits them. Not because they're evil, but because no one stopped them. Authority is often assigned, not earned. And it's assigned to the person who looks like they belong in the spotlight. The shift isn't about taking credit away from others. It's about making sure you're seen before you step aside. Because generosity without visibility isn't virtue, it's self-erasure. And once you start allowing yourself to be seen, something else becomes uncomfortable. The moments where you agree, not because you believe it, but because disagreement feels risky. Once you start showing up and making your contributions visible, there's one final habit that sneaks in, and it's the most socially rewarded of all. It feels good. It keeps the peace. It makes people like you. But beneath that comfort lies a trap, one that quietly teaches people how far they can push you without consequence. The seventh habit is agreeing to avoid discomfort. You nod, you smile, you say, "That's fine," even when it's not. You agree to plans, opinions, or decisions just to keep the moment smooth. It feels polite. It feels safe. It feels like the path of least resistance. But here's the dark truth. Every time you agree when you don't mean it, you're handing over control. You're telling people, "My boundaries are flexible. My opinion doesn't matter as much as keeping this moment easy." Humans are wired to test boundaries. When you give in to avoid tension, you're teaching them where the line is. And once they know, they'll push right up to it. This habit doesn't just erode respect, it erodes your presence. People stop factoring you in. They stop preparing for your needs. They stop considering your time, your input, your limits. And the worst part? This is socially rewarded behavior. People praise you for being easygoing. They see your agreement as maturity. They say you're reasonable and adaptable. But social approval doesn't equal authority. In fact, it often hides a loss of power. Agreeing to avoid discomfort is the polite version of erasure. It's the silent way you shrink yourself so others can feel comfortable, while slowly teaching them that your preferences are optional. The shift isn't about confrontation. It's about alignment. Say yes when you mean yes. Say no when you mean no. Silence the automatic need to smooth over tension. Let discomfort exist. Because respect is born in friction, not comfort. Once you stop agreeing just to avoid tension, the dynamic changes. The room recalibrates. People start noticing your boundaries, and suddenly, your presence is felt differently. It's uncomfortable at first. People test it. They push back. But that discomfort? That's the cost of finally being taken seriously. And here's the thing. Once you master this habit, all the others, over-explaining, apologizing unnecessarily, laughing off disrespect, speaking last, being low maintenance, giving credit too early, they start to reverse themselves. You start reclaiming the reputation that politeness quietly stole from you. Now that we've unpacked all 7 habits, it's time to take a step back and face the truth. Because recognizing these patterns is only the first step. The real power comes from understanding how deeply they've been shaping your reputation and deciding to break them. This is where the shift happens. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. The world doesn't punish politeness. It punishes people who don't understand power. All those harmless habits, over-explaining, unnecessary apologies, laughing off disrespect, holding back your voice, being low maintenance, giving credit before it's deserved, agreeing to avoid discomfort. They've been quietly rewiring how others see you. Here's the shift. Stop apologizing for being human. Stop smoothing over tension. Stop hiding your effort before it's recognized. Stop waiting. Stopping explaining. Stopping giving away your authority in the name of politeness. Respect isn't built on smiles. It isn't built on nods. It isn't built on easy-going behavior. Respect is built on boundaries, presence, and consistency.